Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're coming at you with This Week in Cannabis news from October 4th to the 10th. So before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learn something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos. Then there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so that you can watch episodes to learn about the evolution of the industry over time, identify top companies that you keep seeing pop up that you think will have potential, and take advantage whenever you're ready. But we're going to start as we've got some big news on Friday. Senators push U.S. Attorney General to decriminalize cannabis now as Congress debates the reform bills. So, as congressional lawmakers pursue cannabis legalization, a pair of U.S. senators is calling on Attorney General Merrick Garland to use his own authority to swiftly end federal cannabis prohibition. Now, it seems like this could have been done at the start of the year, but better late than never, as this is one of the methods that we've been talking about in the background. If you just remove cannabis from the CSA, this solves a lot of these issues. Senators Elizabeth Warren and Cory Booker sent a letter on Wednesday making the case that the Justice Department should initiate a descheduling process in order to allow states to regulate cannabis as they see fit and begin to remedy the harm caused by decades of racial disparities in enforcement of cannabis law, facilitate valuable medical research. And while Congress works to pass comprehensive cannabis reform, you can act now to decriminalize cannabis, the letter, which was first reported by the news station, states. And so if we want to look at the details, how would they go about this? So Normal political director Justin Streekel praised the senator's action, telling Marijuana Moment that it is imperative that we pursue every avenue possible to end the senseless and cruel policy of cannabis criminalization. Now the question is, how and when will the Attorney General Merrick Garland respond? So it seems like there are a few different ways they can go about this. Firstly, there's a statutory process through which the Attorney General can seek a cannabis policy change under the Controlled Substances Act without any additional action required by Congress. The official can also initiate such a process on their own, requesting a scientific review directly to U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Under HHS, the Food and Drug Administration would then assess the scientific, medical, and public health implications before submitting the review to the Justice Department. And another method would involve having the HHS secretary or an outside party file a rescheduling petition that would then be reviewed by the Attorney General, who has usually delegated the responsibility to the Drug Enforcement Agency. And we know how well that's gone in the past, not very well, so hopefully that will not be the approach. The senators are recommending the former, which means the first of the approaches, and emphasize that if the HHS secretary ultimately recommends retaining a drug in the same schedule or moving it to a different schedule, that recommendation is not binding, and the Attorney General may still choose to initiate a rulemaking procedure to deschedule or reschedule the drug. Now, I'm not going to speculate what Merrick Garland might do because I don't know, but the good news is that the letter's down here if you want to read it, and then more importantly, they are asking for a response from Garland by October 20th, which is 10 days from now. So within 10 days, we're going to find out whether the Attorney General plans to go through with this or not. So I would consider that very big deal and good news for all cannabis investors and for everyone in this industry in general. So we're just gonna have to wait until then. But the fact that they have started on this process does make me optimistic, because this is, again, one of the many things that they can do to get this done sooner than later. And then I just wanted to share this tweet from Narcos Trader just to highlight really this, because from my understanding, if you remove cannabis from the CSA, you don't need to pass SAFE, because then cannabis goes from being federally illegal to federally legal. In which case we wouldn't even need SAFE, because if cannabis is no longer federally legal, there's nothing stopping banks from taking on these clients other than maybe the stigma, but also exchanges from allowing the uplisting. So I just wanted to share this comment, not because I'm saying he's right or anything. Obviously it would be great if the bottom is in, but only time will tell, and I do think we're nearing that point. But I just want to highlight what he says here. Combo of DOJ changing MJ status, because that gives the Dems the victory they want. That's their social equity. Plus, that victory would allow them to keep SAFE in the NDAA by the end of the year. So just want to highlight this is a next possible best case scenario, because at first when we hear about this could be that one solution that changes everything. But if this is not the case, we could also see something like this. So I just wanted to share this, also removing from the CSA but keeping SAFE in the NDAA. And while this is definitely a best case scenario, I don't consider it wishful thinking, because like what Norcos Trader is doing, what I'm doing, we're just trying to present the facts that we're given weekly in order to look at what the most plausible outcomes are. And if Merrick Garland comes back with a positive reaction, that could flip the switch. So obviously this is not advice, but if you believe in this opportunity, continue to prepare, because based on these companies' valuations and the growth rates, we're not going to see these prices forever. So on to some news out of states. This is the Cannabis Regulatory Commission from New Jersey. And they've announced the next date for an upcoming meeting being October 15th, 2021 at 11:30 a.m., which is 5 days from now. And this is when they will finally be awarding for cultivation and vertically integrated licenses for all the applicants in the state. So this is progress out of New Jersey. Sure, it might be a little bit delayed, but considering that August 19th was the go-ahead to get this started, and September 15th will be when they award the licenses, hopefully this does mean that New Jersey can get their programs up and running sooner than later. On to this news out of Pennsylvania. As I reported on the weekend, bipartisan Pennsylvania senators actually have now unveiled the cannabis legalization bill amid whirlwind of reform efforts in the state. So this is very positive, as a much anticipated bipartisan Senate bill to legalize cannabis in Pennsylvania that has been months in the making was formally introduced on Friday. It is the latest in a string of reform measures that lawmakers from both sides of the aisle have been promoting in recent days. Senators Dan Laughlin and Sharif Street unveiled the nearly 240-page legislation months after first outlining some key details back in February. It would allow adults 21 and older to purchase and possess up to 30 grams of cannabis, 5 grams of cannabis concentrate products, and 500 milligrams of THC contained in cannabis-infused products. So this is all we have for now, but considering the fact that this is a bipartisan effort in the Republican-controlled Senate, is very positive for the outlook of adult use legalization in Pennsylvania. And so the bill is attached here with all the amendments that have been added on, so you can check that out if you want. But I do think this is positive because Pennsylvania is one of these large states with a strong medical program that has been talking about legalizing for adult use for a long time. But it's good to see a bipartisan effort, which means we might actually see reform possibly in 2022 in Pennsylvania. While just some updates from those who held positions of power in the past, former Attorney General says U.S. is on the path to federal cannabis decriminalization, which is something positive, as Eric Holder, who served as the nation's top law enforcement official under President Barack Obama, like he knows something that we don't, spoke on a drug policy panel hosted by Ohio State University's Moritz College of Law on Thursday. He said he felt encouraged that the U.S. is trending towards more lenient laws on drugs that treat addiction as a public health matter, and he also argued that federal cannabis reform is increasingly inevitable. The war on drugs has cost people their livelihood and taxpayer dollars, Holder said, and society is starting to move in a different direction. And he adds, now with regard to decriminalization, we are clearly on the path to decriminalizing cannabis. He said, you know it's going to happen. We're on a glide path now. So I think this is worth taking a bit seriously because there's got to be some truth to that. If the former Attorney General is saying you know it's going to happen, this does go in line with what we often hear is it's a matter of when, not if, and just best to plan ahead for when that day does come. And we have another one from the federal financial regulator, Rodney Hood, who was previously featured in a Marijuana Moment article. He urges Congress to act on cannabis banking ahead of inevitable legalization. And this is an op-ed written by him. So I'm not going to go through the entire thing, but I do want to highlight some things he points out that are just notable. To put that into clear context, the National Credit Union Administration, the NCUA, where I serve as a board member, provides regulatory oversight of more than 5,000 federally insured credit unions. The fact that only 169 of those, less than 3%, are comfortable working with legal cannabis enterprises suggests a serious market failure, which is true. And the fault does not lie with the financial services providers. Oh, of course. Many industry leaders tell me they would like to work with marijuana-related businesses, but they're hesitant, owing to the uncertainty and stigma surrounding the industry in the absence of federal action, which would help, again, remove that uncertainty and stigma. So until congressional action happens, we can take some regulatory steps to help things along at the federal level. As a member of the NCUA board, I formally requested the establishment of a working group under the auspices of the Federal Financial Institution Examination Council, the interagency body that develops uniform principles and standards for federal financial institution examinations. This will create an accountable government entity that can focus on developing a preliminary regulatory framework we can share with our regulators and members of Congress who share our concern in addressing these problems. Meanwhile, I encourage financial industry leaders who care about this issue to make their voices heard. So it's good to call on others who care about the issue, but there may not be others who care about it. So at least Rodney Hood is making his voice heard. You can check him out on Twitter, or obviously you can just read the article here, which will be linked below. But again, this is positive as this is coming from top regulators or former attorney generals, those who have had influence in the past and likely know more than we do. And then I just wanted to share this tweet from Ben Kovler, highlighting that change is happening in America, as this comes from Adrian Wojnarowski, who is ESPN's senior NBA insider. Players won't be subject to random tests for cannabis this season, according to NBPA memo shared with players and obtained by ESPN. That's been adjusted policy through Orlando restart and 2021 season. Testing continues for drugs of abuse and performance-enhancing substances. This is a huge win, especially because, yes, of course, what happens in the NBA and these large organizations can often echo into other industries as well. And this is one big way that we can help remove the stigma. On to Tilray's first quarter fiscal 2022 financial results. So we're going to go through this as they're happy to announce net revenue and gross profit increased 43% and 46% year over year, not quarter over quarter, respectively, for the largest global cannabis cultivator, which is also just not necessarily true. We're going to go through this though and just read through some of their highlights. So these are the financial highlights that they wanted to provide. Net revenue increased 43.8% to $168 million during the first quarter from $117 million from the prior year quarter. The increase was driven by 38% growth in the net cannabis revenue to $70 million, net beverage alcohol revenue of $15 million following the Sweetwater acquisition on November 25th, 2020, and wellness revenue of $15 million from Manitoba Harvest. With that, they've maintained their number one market share in Canada with leading portfolio of comprehensive medical cannabis and adult use brands, including top position in cannabis flower and pre-rolls, 5 Tilray brands ranked in the top 5 brands across all adult use product categories. They are the international market leader and number one in Germany with medical cannabis extracts. They did suffer a net loss of $34.6 million during the first quarter compared to a net loss of $21.7 million in the prior year quarter. An adjusted EBITDA of $12.7 million in the first quarter of 2022, 58% growth compared to the prior year, and the 10th consecutive quarter of a positive adjusted EBITDA. If adjusted EBITDA were normalized for Aphria's production costs, metrics would have been closer to $17 million. Gross profit increased 46% to $51 million from $35 million in the prior year quarter. Adjusted gross margin in the cannabis segment has remained strong at 43%, with cost saving synergies of $55 million achieved on a run rate basis to date, with actual cash savings close to $20 million, on track for at least $80 million in cost savings from Aphria and Tilray business combination synergies. And with all that said, from the data, it's pretty clear that in terms of all LPs, Tilray is the number one position Canadian LP compared to Canopy and Aurora, just based on the market share they are keeping in Canada, plus the future growth that they have in other countries. But it's worth noting that they're not always going to be there. They're going to have to put in work to stay there. And one thing that they've mentioned is they want to get their market share to at least 30%. And I know that they're nowhere near that. So they have a lot of work to do. Now, just to go through this, there is some more quarter momentum across segments. You can pause to read that if you want. And their ongoing global growth opportunity. I'm not going to read all this, but you can pause to read the industry's broadest geographic footprint and operational scale, leading market share in Canada with a comprehensive portfolio of product offerings and carefully curated brands. So they say that they're at approximately 16% to its goal of 30% by the end of 2024. So they've got time. Either way, tremendous international growth opportunities from a strong base, especially if Germany opens up sooner than later. But again, that's not a reality yet. And a leading US CPG platform to be immediately leveraged for cannabis products upon federal legalization. And that's talking about some of their subsidiaries in the US. So all in all, though, not a terrible quarter from them, but thing to point out, at least on their consolidated statement of financial position, we can see here they do have a lot of goodwill and intangible assets that will need to be written off, but I think this is still quite small compared to the goodwill that Canopy and Aurora do have. But if we do scroll down, I just wanted to break down their revenue, because if we look, we've got their cannabis revenue, distribution revenue, beverage alcohol revenue, and wellness revenue. So their cannabis revenue is actually only $70.4 million, while their distribution revenue from CC Pharma, a German distribution network that they own, or a pharmacy chain network, $67.1 million. So, only 42% of their revenue is actually coming from cannabis, while a lot of it's coming from distribution, beverage alcohol, and wellness. And if we look at their comprehensive income statement, I think they're very happy just to highlight, because other Canadian LPs can't, that year over year they are posting positive growth numbers. But more importantly, if we look, they are not making money from their operations yet. And so that is a negative $34.6 million income from operations, not positive. But if we compare this to Canopy and Aurora, other Canadian LPs, they're not losing nearly as much. And the only other Canadian LP I would say is probably more financially healthy than Tilray, because they're much smaller, is VFF. But they're also sort of their own different beast. And that's why it's just so important to try and understand the companies that you're investing in. But one thing that I just want to highlight, so I think these were fine financials, just showing that they are making progress in improving, trying to get more market share. But then Reuters writes, Tilray posts 43% rise in quarterly revenue on strong cannabis demand. And if we go down here, it just simply says, the world's largest cannabis producer by sales. And that's just completely a false statement, because whoever wrote this article just took it at face value from whoever they interviewed and clearly just has not done their own research, knowing that Curaleaf last quarter sold $312 million in cannabis alone, not half the revenue coming from distribution networks. Green Thumb, $222 million. Showed TLRY last quarter from cannabis alone, 57, Canopy, 108 million from cannabis alone, but Trulieve in the US, 215 million from cannabis alone, Cresco Labs, 210 from cannabis alone, and Verano, 119 from cannabis alone. So this is just to highlight why most of my capital is invested in US MSOs. I do own shares of TLRY still, but I've moved most of my money over the past year into Cresco, Trulieve, and other U.S. multi-state operators because that's where I see the most growth coming, especially if we see some sort of legislative change on the horizon. So just wanted to add that because more and more we're seeing this in so-called media. We're not seeing much journalism anymore. We're just seeing people write what they're told, and so it's just a good reminder that you can see this, but if you actually know. The reality is different. Highlighting if you don't do your own research or find your own individual trusted sources that you can look to find that information, you might not get accurate news out of the media. On to this from the Office of Medical Cannabis Use. We take a look at the last week from October 4th to the 8th, and Florida has increased their patient count to 622,267, which is an increase of 3,039 over the last week. And we can see Sanctuary Medicinals opened up a new dispensary in St. Petersburg, and the sales have slowed down from the end of month last in September, which is notable because those numbers were quite large, but it also seems to be a trend that there's less sales at the beginning of the month and they pick up near the end of the month. It was also probably driven by the sort of price wars going on and the fact that Trulieve and Harvest merger closed. So I'm sure Harvest was trying to sell everything that they had, even at low margin, just to get that out of the door. But we can see here the amount of milligrams in THC sold, milligrams of CBD sold, and ounces of smokable flower if you want to check to see how much any of the companies you might be invested in did end up pulling in this last week. And I just wanted to share this one from Free Cash Flow. When Florida goes adult rec, the legal market size will increase 4x to 5x from current levels, and producers will need every square foot of grow capacity. These market share skirmishes now are not worth worrying about. See the big picture, $6.5 billion in annual market, and I want to highlight this because it's a very good point. Cannabis revenue per capita. So you got to think of the population of people within the state. And if we take a look at Colorado, obviously because there's only, say, 5.7 million people in Colorado, I think. I don't know these populations offhand. Oklahoma, I don't know them. But if we compare Oklahoma to Florida, Oklahoma, $224 cannabis revenue per capita, whereas Florida is still sitting at a little 79. So worth noting down here the population. All of these states that have not opened up for adult use yet, but plan to, Florida could be as soon as 2022 if that gets on the ballot. New York, 19.5. New Jersey, 8.9. Virginia, 8.5. All of these states that will soon be transitioning to adult use. There's just so much potential. So I think it's wise to try to think long-term as best as you can. Obviously, most of us today are wired for short-term gratification, but it's very difficult to get rewarded if, you're only in it for the short term and you're failing to look at these big factors or these long-term factors that will come into play in time. On to some MSO news. Columbia Care announces grand opening of Cannabis dispensary in Missouri, first Cannabis in the state and 9th in the nation. So they're happy to announce the first Cannabis dispensary in Missouri located in Hermann is now open. This marks the 9th Cannabis location and the 75th active Columbia Care dispensary in the U.S. as Cannabis Hermann is located at 2060 Village Lane. The dispensary boasts 7 points of sale and a drive-through service window. Columbia Care will also open a manufacturing facility nearby Columbia, which will produce vapes, edibles, tinctures, tablets, and pre-rolls. Missouri's medical cannabis sales reached more than $113 million in September. Since launching in October 2020, these are approximately 150,000 registered medical patients in the state. Hermann is located between Kansas City and St. Louis, the two most populated centers in the state. So that's positive progress from Columbia Care, while Trulieve announces the 93rd Florida location with the reopening of its Kiss Me dispensary today, announcing that the location was formerly branded as a Harvest House of Cannabis. So this seems to be the first that they reopened and switched over. The dispensary is Trulieve's 93rd location in Florida and opens 1 week after closing for renovation and rebranding. So think about that. It took them 1 week to rebrand, renovate, and open. That's pretty impressive. October 1st, Trulieve announced the closing of its acquisition of Harvest and Recreation, at which time all Harvest locations in Florida were closed for rebranding to Trulieve. The company will continue to reopen locations in Florida throughout the month of October. So it's just positive to see how quickly that they can do that, and you best believe that they're going to keep doing that with every other Harvest location until it's Trulieve, and I'll be happy to report that in the coming weeks. While Green Thumb announces the expansion of Rise Mundelein in Illinois to enhance guest experience. So if companies in an industry are expanding, does that mean that their industry is likely growing? Probably. So the fact that we're seeing expansion or, closing to reopen as opposed to seeing closures, that's very positive for this industry, as it again emphasizes the fact that there's so much more growth to come. Today announced it will host a grand reopening for its newly expanded retail store, Rise Mundelein, on October 16th. A patient and guest appreciation event will take place on Saturday, October 16th from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. and include a ribbon cutting ceremony at 8:30 a.m. as Mundelein Mayor Steve Lentz will be in attendance. Rise Mundelein has been an important part of the Green Thumb story since opening as Illinois' first medical dispensary in 2015. On January 1st, 2020, we were one of the first stores in the state to serve adult use consumers, said Green Thumb founder and Chief Executive Officer Ben Kovler. Americans are overwhelmingly choosing cannabis for well-being, and we look forward to enhancing our patient and customer experience at Rise Mundelein for today and the future. So good on you guys, Green Thumb, especially they want to do this expansion sooner than later. They didn't want to wait till it's too late or becomes expensive to do this. And again, just sees me as them getting ahead of the game. Although not all MSO news was good news this week, as MSO Curaleaf faces more Oregon suits over THC-CBD mix-up, which is just a very unfortunate human error and a very important lesson for Curaleaf, because I'm sure that they will go through this and ensure that this does not happen again, but we're going to find out what happened. As cannabis multi-state operator, Curaleaf now has been hit with 4 federal lawsuits in connection with a product labeling snafu in Oregon that resulted in some customers ingesting high THC instead of CBD wellness drops. And we can understand that if someone's never taken THC before, that this can be shocking for them. But hopefully, in hindsight, this does show the efficacy and safety of this plant, because this did not put the person's life at risk. Unfortunately, what one of the doctors chose to do could have actually put them more at risk than what the THC did. But at the same time, obviously, this is still a mistake on Curaleaf, and they should, do what is necessary to make sure that these customers are happy and at ease with what happened to them. But also, just to highlight that if there wasn't such a stigma around the plant, there'd be more education, and people might not freak out the way that they did. Anyways, the case, which involves the Select brand in Oregon, underscores the importance of sound quality assurance processes, which is 100% true. Curaleaf completed its acquisition of Portland-based Cure Cannabis, which owned the Select brand in February 2020. According to the lawsuits filed between September 29th and October 6th, at least 3 people went to hospital emergency departments after suffering adverse reactions. In fact, one elderly man, this is the craziest part of the story for me, was taken to emergency because of concerns he was having a stroke. He wound up allegedly undergoing an unnecessary surgery to remove what doctors believed was potentially infected hematoma in his leg. I hope the doctor paid for the surgery as opposed to charging him for it. The Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission, which issued an expanded product recall on September 24th, said 13 people reported taking the mislabeled drop. So keep that in mind, though. If 13 people reported that and only 3 went to the emergency room, then it's worth noting that 10 of those people have potentially experienced THC before, and therefore that's why they did not react like some of the others did. Again, it's still Curaleaf's fault. Just wanted to highlight, though, a lot of these factors in context. So Massachusetts-based Curaleaf told MJ Biz Daily on Friday that it doesn't comment on litigation, but a spokeswoman emailed a copy of a statement the company issued late last month, which attributed the mix-up to an unintentional human error at our facility that led to the production of a batch of CBD drops that were actually THC drops and vice versa. Curaleaf has said it has worked with Oregon regulators to recall the 2 batches in question. They were produced in May. Approximately 500 bottles of CBD-labeled drops that contained elevated THC were sold before the recall, as well as 630 bottles of THC-labeled drops that contained CBD but little or no THC, the company said. The Oregonian report said that some customers who took the drops from the mislabeled bottles might have received more than 30 milligrams of THC. And since Curaleaf has apologized to customers affected by the mistake and said it is grateful to regulators and individuals who brought the serious matter to our attention, because obviously they didn't know, so it's good that they can be now held accountable. In response to this event, as initial steps, we are reviewing production practices and controls to improve quality assurance processes and conducting additional training sessions with our production team beginning immediately and continuing regularly, Curaleaf said in a statement. So Oregon requires cannabis products to be tested, but the testing is done before packaging. State regulators continue to investigate, but in the meantime have allowed Curaleaf to continue normal business operations in Oregon, according to the Oregon. So out of all this, each of the 4 lawsuits against Curaleaf filed in U.S. District Court in Portland by the same attorney seek punitive damages of up to 1% of Curaleaf's net worth. So that's going to be difficult for them to go after, and I imagine Boris could take care of this himself. Now again, not saying that Curaleaf is not to blame here. They did mix this up, but just goes to show, I think is more important, highlighting the efficacy of this plant and the safety of it versus what we actually know is the 3rd leading cause of death in the U.S. Because if you didn't know this, Your healthcare might kill you. Medical errors. Recent studies of medical errors, and this is as of late of 2017, so fairly recent, but recent studies of medical errors have estimated errors may account for as many as 251,000 deaths annually in the U.S., making medical error the third leading cause of death. And at the same time, less than 10% of medical errors are reported as errors, because oftentimes they can be reported as something else, which is very sad. So just to highlight that, look, doctors do their best, and there are good doctors, there are bad doctors. I'm not trying to generalize or anything like that. I just want to share this information with you if you did not know this, because this can happen. And I think the biggest threat to this overall situation was the fact that a doctor underwent surgery on this man as opposed to telling him to, hey, just chill, take deep breaths, your vital signs are all good. And so again, this is just my opinion. I'm not saying I'm right or wrong. I just wanted to share that perspective. But more importantly, if you did not know this, this is worth noting. If you can take care of your health and stay healthy without having to rely on prescriptions or anything like that, try to do that, because that's what I do. And, you know, life couldn't be better for me. And so, you know, just sharing that perspective. On to this from Normal. Harris poll, 2/3 of U.S. adults favor legalizing cannabis. 2/3 of U.S. adults favor a repeal of federal cannabis prohibition, according to nationwide polling data compiled by Harris Research. 66% of respondents in a nationally representative sample endorsed legalizing cannabis for adults, with support being strongest among millennials, 79%, and members of Generation X, 76%. By contrast, just under 50% of baby boomers backed adult use legalization. So this trend is becoming more and more popular, as now more than 2/3 of U.S. favor legalizing for adult use. The results are consistent with those of other recent national polls, including those by Gallup, Morning Consult, and Quinnipiac University, showing that a supermajority of Americans believe that marijuana ought to be legalized for adults. When asked whether cannabis should be legal for medicinal purposes, 84% of respondents answered affirmatively, a percentage that is also consistent with prior pollings. So as support builds and pressure mounts, it seems like we're getting closer than ever, and we just have to wait for what Merrick Garland's response may be and what legislative changes we might see over the next 3, 6 to 12 months. Well, lastly, just wanted to share this tweet from Pete Landrum, who is a DC lobbyist, and he works closely with Brady Cobb. And so I want to highlight good discussions with Senate staff this week on safe banking and CAOA. Broad understanding that without banking services, business deductions, and reasonable capital availability, small businesses will have a hard time. Senate NDAA is looking like a November play now. And then Brady adds, having been part of most of those discussions this week with Pete, he is spot on. SAFE is now a bipartisan issue. And once the NDAA is taken up in the Senate, it's going to get interesting. Bring on November. So just imagine Chuck trying to remove SAFE from the NDAA. With SAFE now being a bipartisan issue, it's not going to be that easy. And I just want to highlight this loser here going, ha, 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 fake account, LMAO. Like, I don't know anyone over the age of 18 that talks like that. And then Brady like, no, real account, been working with Pete since 2016. Expect more of a self-professed journalist like this clown right here. Stay lifted and try harder. And this is him and Pete. You got to appreciate these men that are actually down here or down on the ground in DC, putting in the work, and they're willing to share their information. And this is from the U.S. Cannabis Town Hall, exploring the political calculus of SAFE via the NDAA. And this was recorded, I think, on September 21st. So it's a little bit old, but it just highlights what these lobbyists are seeing on the ground. So if you actually want to get, real accurate information on what they're seeing, you can listen to that. And I think just the fact that this, combined with the new development that the senators have asked for the Attorney General to consider removing cannabis from the CSA, we are in the best position that we could possibly be in. But that is it for today's episode, folks. I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope you got some value out of it. What did you think of the stories mentioned, especially the Curaleaf one? I do want to know if you think that could have been handled better or worse, or what you think of the situation looking back on it, and especially about the senators asking the Attorney General to deschedule cannabis. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or concerns, and I'd be happy to address them. But besides that, if you enjoyed this, please leave a like on it, as it really helps out my channel. Subscribe below if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I'll catch you on Wednesday for a midweek update. Have a great weekend, everybody, and happy Canadian Thanksgiving to all the Canadians out there.